August 20, 1966. A teenager flies a kite in the hills of Niterói, Brazil. Something catches his eye in the tall grass. Two men, formally dressed, lie side by side. Motionless. Perfectly aligned. They wear new dark suits and waterproofs. Their watches are carefully tucked into their pockets. And over their faces, lead masks, crudely cut to cover only their eyes. In one of their pockets, a note. Handwritten, with precise instructions. 4:30 p.m. be at the agreed location. 6:30 p.m. ingest capsules. After the effect takes effect, protect yourself from metals and wait for the signal. There are no signs of violence. There is no cause of death. Just an inexplicable ritual, and a mystery that almost 60 years later, no one has been able to solve. This is the case of the lead masks of Morro do Vintém. A story that has baffled researchers, ufologists, scientists, and detectives for decades. The case has all the elements of an impossible thriller: two electronics technicians embarking on a secret trip. A mysterious experiment on a secluded hill. Reports of luminous objects in the sky. And two deaths that defy all conventional explanation. What makes this case particularly fascinating is not just the mystery itself, but the quality of the evidence. We have police documents. Multiple testimonies. Physical objects. A detailed chronology of these men's final days. And yet, almost 6 decades later, we still don't know for sure what happened on that hill. The case was investigated in 1980 by Jacques Vallée, an astrophysicist who worked for NASA and is considered one of the world's leading researchers of anomalous phenomena. He personally climbed the hill, spoke with the original detectives, and analyzed the evidence. Their conclusion has left more questions than answers. I'm David, and today we're going to delve into one of the most disturbing and meticulously documented cases in modern history. We're going to examine every piece of evidence, every testimony, every theory. In the end, you will decide what to believe. To understand this case, we first have to understand Brazil in 1966. The country was living under a military dictatorship that had seized power just 2 years earlier, in March 1964. It was a time of political repression, censorship, and distrust of the authorities. This context, as we will see, significantly affected the investigation of this case. But 1966 in Brazil was not just about repression. It was also a time of extraordinary spiritual ferment. Spiritism, Kardechism, extraterrestrial contact movements, all these currents coexisted with the country's rapid modernization. Valley of the Dawn movement had been founded, combining Christianity, spiritualism, and, specifically, UFO theology. Thousands of people believed not only in the possibility of extraterrestrial life, but also in the possibility of making contact with it. Pause. And these weren't just fringe beliefs. The Brazilian Air Force itself had established an official commission to investigate UFO reports. In the 1960s, Brazil was a global epicenter of sightings. Manuel Pereira de Cruz and Miguel José Viana lived in this context. Manuel was 32 years old. Miguel was 34. Both were married. Both worked as electronics technicians in Campos dos Goitacazes, a city 286 kilometers from Rio de Janeiro. They weren't marginalized or unstable individuals. They were competent professionals. Manuel and Miguel had studied electronics, even through correspondence courses with American institutions. They wanted to open their own business together. By all accounts, they were close friends with shared interests. And those interests were fascinating: the most advanced technology of his time, and spiritualism. For them, there was no contradiction. Manuel's wife later confirmed that both men had explored scientific spiritualism. They believed that technology and electronic circuits could be a tool for contacting something beyond. Spirits. Higher entities. Perhaps, beings from other worlds. And in August 1966, Manuel and Miguel were ready to put their beliefs to the test. In the early morning of August 17, 1966, Manuel woke up his wife. He told her that he and Miguel were going to São Paulo to buy a used car and some electronic components for the workshop. A routine business trip. Nothing out of the ordinary. Except that wasn't the real destination. That morning, Manuel and Miguel left Campos dos Goitacazes carrying 2.3 million cruzeros. In dollars at the time, approximately $96. A considerable amount, but not extraordinary for buying a used car. At 2:30 p.m., the two men boarded a bus. But they weren't headed to São Paulo. They were going in the opposite direction, towards Niterói, Rio de Janeiro's sister city, on the other side of the bay. They had lied about their destination. At approximately 2:30 in the afternoon, Manuel and Miguel arrived in Niterói. And this is where the story gets strange. Their first stop was an electronics store called Fluoscope. They went in, looked around, and spoke to the owner. And they didn't buy anything. Their next stop, a clothing store. Here they bought two identical raincoats. The salespeople remembered them because, although it was raining when they arrived in Niterói, by the time of the purchase the sky was clear. Why buy raincoats in the sun? The vendors also noticed that the men were in a hurry. Their last recorded stop was a small bar. They bought a bottle of mineral water. They carefully kept the receipt. The barmaid later told the police something disturbing. Miguel was very nervous. He kept checking his watch over and over again. As if she had a date. A date she couldn't miss. Images of Morro do Vintém, wooded hill. They were last seen at 3:15 in the afternoon. Walking towards the hills. Morro do Vintém is not an easy hill to climb. The terrain is uneven, wooded, and isolated. It's not a place you go to casually. It's a place you go to with a purpose. But the view from the top, the view is spectacular. You can see Niterói stretching eastward. To the west, across the bay, the lights of Rio de Janeiro are beginning to twinkle at sunset. If you wanted to see a signal coming from any direction, this would be the perfect place. Sometime that afternoon, Manuel and Miguel built a small makeshift shelter using vines and leaves. They put on their new raincoats. They lay down side by side on the grass. And they published the article. 4:30 p.m. be at the agreed location. 6:30 p.m. ingest capsules. After the effect takes effect, protect metals and wait for the signal mask. 16:30. Be at the agreed place. They had arrived. They were in position. 18:30. Swallow capsules. What capsules? What did they contain? They were never found. But the note is clear, there was something they were supposed to take. Something that would have an effect. After the metal protection effect. And here the masks appear. Those strange, crude lead masks. Cut specifically to cover only the eyes. Secured with simple wire. Wait for mask signal. Wait, for what sign? The sun sets. The temperature drops. Manuel and Miguel lie on that hill, wearing their lead masks, waiting. And then, at approximately 7 p.m., a woman named Gracinda Barbosa Coutinho de Souza was driving with her 3 children on a road near the hills. His daughter yells at him to look up. Suspended above Morro do Vintém is an enormous object. Oval-shaped. Bright orange in color. Sending rays in all directions. The object remained motionless on the hill for several minutes. Then, it disappears. August 18th. August 19th. August 20th. 3 days pass. In Campos dos Goitacazes, Manuel and Miguel's wives begin to worry. They haven't heard from them. They haven't returned. In Morro do Vintém, under the tropical sun, something is happening on that hill. August 20th, afternoon. Jorge da Costa Alves, an 18-year-old teenager, is flying a kite on the slopes of Vintém Hill. Among the tall grass, he sees something that makes him let go of his kite string. 2 men. Motionless. With strange masks over their faces. Jorge runs. Terrified. Straight to the nearest police station. But there's a problem. The terrain in Morro do Vintém is too difficult. The police cannot arrive before nightfall. They have to wait until the next day. One more night. The bodies remain there, unguarded, in the darkness. August 21st, morning. A small team of police and firefighters finally reaches the summit of Morro do Vintém. What they find leaves them completely baffled. The two men lie side by side, almost touching. Perfectly aligned. As if someone had carefully positioned them. They are dressed in dark formal suits. Over them, new raincoats, still with the tags on. And over their faces, those inexplicable lead masks. The masks are crude, clearly handmade. Cut specifically to cover only the eyes. Secured with simple wire around the head. These aren't welding goggles. They aren't standard protective equipment. They're something unique. Something made specifically for this moment. The detectives begin documenting the scene. They find money in the men's pockets. Not all of it, but a considerable amount. If this were a robbery, why would they leave money behind? They also find their watches. Not on their wrists, but carefully stored in a plastic bag in one of their pockets. Why would you keep your watch before you die? Near the bodies. An empty mineral water bottle. Several wet towels. Receipts for purchases made on August 17th. And the note with the instructions. But there's something missing. The capsules mentioned in the note were never found. Not a trace of them. The bodies are taken to the morgue. And here, the case takes another disturbing turn. The bodies are in an unbelievable state of decomposition. 3, maybe 4 days have passed since their deaths. But the decomposition is much more advanced than it should be. The leaked autopsy reports mention something particularly strange. The internal organs are described as liquefied. There are no signs of external violence. There are no wounds. There is no visible trauma. But internally, something devastating happened. The Niterói police begin to reconstruct the last days of Manuel and Miguel. They trace the bus they took. They find the raincoat shop. The bar. The vendors remember the men. The schedules match. Everything is documented, verified, confirmed. Until 3:15 p.m. on August 17th. After that, silence. The detectives travel to Campos dos Goitacazes. They talk to the wives. To friends. To colleagues. And fascinating details begin to emerge. Manuel's wife reveals that both men had been exploring scientific spiritualism. They believed in the possibility of contact with higher entities, possibly extraterrestrials. Miguel's wife reveals something even more specific. Before leaving, Miguel had confided in her privately, he wasn't going to Sao Paulo. He was going to Niterói to conduct some kind of experiment in Morro. And he told a cousin something even more revealing. Buying a car isn't the real purpose of this trip. When I get back, I'll tell you whether or not I believe in spiritualism. When I return. Miguel expected to return. This was not a planned suicide. The detectives order full toxicology tests. They need to know what was in those capsules. What caused the abnormal decomposition? What killed these men? But there's a problem. By the time toxicology tests are ordered, the bodies have been in an inadequately refrigerated morgue for days. In the tropical heat of Brazil. The viscera are too decomposed. Toxicological analysis is never performed. But the investigation takes an unexpected turn when the police begin interviewing residents of the area. Multiple people reported seeing something strange on the night of August 17th. Gracinda Barbosa Coutinho de Souza, described as a respectable, society lady, reports with her 3 children as witnesses, a huge, oval, orange object, suspended over Morro do Vintém around 7 p.m. It wasn't a plane. It wasn't a helicopter. It was something that, according to their description, sent beams in all directions. The object remained motionless on the hill for several minutes. Exactly where, hours earlier, Manuel and Miguel had climbed. Exactly at the time the note indicated, after 6:30 p.m., when they were to wait for the signal. Other residents in the area also reported unusual lights that night. Some attributed it to lightning. It was a rainy night. But Griselda and her children are emphatic, it wasn't a flash in the pan. It was something structured. Something intentional. The detectives also discover something disturbing. This is not the first case of its kind. In 1962, 4 years earlier, a man named Hermes Luis Feitosa was found dead in almost identical conditions in the same region. He also wore a lead mask. He had also gone there to test psychic abilities. He also believed that he could, without devices, receive signals from the ether. Coincidence? Or part of a larger pattern? The investigation continues, but every lead goes to a dead end. Without toxicology, there is no cause of death. Without the capsules, there is no physical evidence of what they ingested. Without direct witnesses to what happened on that hill, there is only speculation. In 1969, 3 years after the deaths, the case was officially closed. Classification, unresolved. And that could have been the end of the story. 2 strange deaths lost in the dusty archives of a Brazilian police station. Except that this case is certainly striking. Jacques Vallée is not just any investigator of paranormal phenomena. He is an astrophysicist who worked for NASA. A computer scientist who pioneered the development of the Internet. Author of numerous academic books on anomalous phenomena. He is, without exaggeration, one of the most respected and rigorous researchers in this field. And the character of Claude Lacombe in Spielberg's film, Close Encounters of the Third Kind, is based on him. In April 1980, 14 years after the deaths, Vallée traveled to Brazil specifically to investigate the case of the lead masks. Vallée doesn't stay in the city interviewing people. He climbs Morro do Vintém himself. He walks exactly where Manuel and Miguel walked. He examines the site where the bodies were found. And what he finds deeply disturbs him. The place where the bodies lay is sterile. 14 years later, in a tropical climate where vegetation grows wild, at that specific spot, nothing grows. The grass hasn't grown back. The ground is scorched. Vallée takes soil samples. He takes measurements. And according to his report published later, he finds traces of residual radiation. Not dangerous levels. But present. Anomalous. Vallée meets with Saulo Soares de Souza, the detective from the Rio Police Headquarters who specialized in tracking this case for years. The detective shares his personal theory with Vallée: the men died of a curare overdose. Curare is a paralytic poison traditionally used by indigenous peoples of South America. In high doses, it causes respiratory paralysis. Death is relatively quick but conscious, the muscles cease to function, but the mind remains alert, for a time. Imagine lying on that hill, conscious but unable to move, waiting for something, someone, to respond to your signal. The detective also mentions something strange about the bodies: they didn't smell of decomposition when they were found. And they weren't attacked by carrion birds. As if something in their body chemistry repelled them. Vallée published his findings in his book, Confrontations, A Scientist's Search for Alien Contact, in 1990. He opens the book specifically with this case. And his conclusion. Vallée classifies the case as a possible, close encounter of the fifth kind, a bilateral interaction consciously initiated by humans. It gives it a credibility rating of 443, the highest possible ratings for reliability of sources and site visit by a qualified researcher. In other words, Vallée, a skeptical and rigorous scientist, believes that this case has no satisfactory conventional explanation. So what really happened in Morro do Vintém? After almost 60 years, multiple investigations, and hundreds of hours of analysis, we still don't have a definitive answer. But we have theories. Several theories. And each of them has compelling aspects, and aspects that simply don't fit. We're going to examine them. All of them. With the same objectivity. Theory 1, extraterrestrial contact. This is probably the best-known theory, and the one that Jacques Vallée seriously considered. The evidence in favor is disturbing. First, multiple witnesses report a luminous orange object over the hill at the exact moment the note indicates they should wait for the signal. Second, the note itself suggests a contact protocol. Ingest capsules, to alter the state of consciousness. Protect metals, with lead masks, possibly against radiation or some kind of energy. Third, Vallée reports residual radiation at the site 14 years later. The soil is barren, with no vegetation growing. Fourth, the abnormal decomposition of the bodies. The liquefied organs. The absence of odor or bird attacks. Fifth, the historical context. Brazil in the 1960s had extraordinary documented UFO activity. The Air Force had an official commission investigating sightings. And sixth, the precedent of 1962. Hermes Luis Feitosa, in similar circumstances, in the same region, also with a lead mask. The theory suggests that Manuel and Miguel attempted intentional contact. That the capsules were psychoactive substances designed to expand their consciousness. That the lead masks were protection against some kind of radiation or energy they expected to encounter. And that, he answered something. But there are problems with this theory. First, there is no direct physical evidence of extraterrestrial technology. The lights in the sky could have conventional explanations. Second, the radiation that Vallée reports was never independently verified by other researchers. Third, if this was a successful contact, why did it end in death? Why couldn't a civilization capable of interstellar travel make contact safely? Theory 2, spiritualist experiment gone wrong. This is perhaps the most likely theory. And also the most tragic. We know, from testimonies of their own families, that Manuel and Miguel were deeply interested in scientific spiritualism. They believed that technology and altered states of consciousness could allow communication with higher entities. Miguel explicitly told his cousin, "When I return, I will tell you whether or not I believe in spiritualism." I expected to return. This was an experiment, not suicide. In 1980, a yoga teacher, consulted by Vallée, suggested that the capsules might have contained psychoactive alkaloids such as LSD, 25 or mescaline. These substances are used in some spiritualist circles to increase mental alertness and facilitate transcendental experiences. The theory is this: Manuel and Miguel climbed that hill to conduct an altered state experiment. They took some psychoactive substance, hoping it would allow them to perceive or contact something. The lead masks may have been part of the ritual. Perhaps they believed that blocking ordinary vision would allow them to see with a different sense. The shelter of vines and leaves would protect them from the rain. So would their raincoats. They planned to stay there for hours, possibly all night, waiting for their signal. But something went terribly wrong. Perhaps the dose was too high. Perhaps the substances were adulterated. Perhaps they mixed compounds that shouldn't have been mixed. The curare that Detective Solo suggests could explain the paralysis. If it was mixed with psychoactive substances, they could have died conscious but immobile, experiencing who knows what visions or terrors. This theory explains a lot. The note with the ritual protocol. The inexplicable masks. Why were they hoping to return? Why did they carefully guard their watches and money? The absence of violence. But it doesn't explain everything. What about the UFO sighting reported by multiple witnesses? What caused the abnormal decomposition? Why did the soil remain sterile for years? Where did they get the substances from? And the most unsettling question: who wrote the note? Theory 3, the third man. Narrator. This theory arises from several disturbing details that do not fit into the other explanations. First, a security guard at the Vintém Hill base reported that Manuel and Miguel did not arrive alone. There was at least one other person with them. Second, the handwriting on the note with the instructions belonged neither to Manuel nor to Miguel. Third, Jacques Vallée and Detective Solo deliberated at length about the theory of an intellectual mentor who was manipulating the situation from the shadows. Researcher Solo observed, there should be someone, at a higher level, who remained behind the scenes, whom they trusted, possibly the person who gave the orders written in the notes. So, who was this person? A leader of some spiritualist group? Someone who convinced them they could contact higher entities? Someone who provided them with the capsules? This theory takes a darker turn when you consider that money was missing. Cruz and Viana were carrying 2.3 million cruzeros. Only 160,000 were found on their bodies. Is it possible they were deceived? Lured to that hill with false promises of spiritual contact, poisoned, and robbed? In 1966, a man named Hamilton Bazzani confessed to the police that he had helped to rob and kill Manuel and Miguel after meeting them at a spiritualist center. According to Bazzani, he and an accomplice lured them to Niterói, forced them at gunpoint to take poison, and left them to die on the hill. But the police investigated his confession and they found nothing to support it. No evidence. No verifiable connection. Bazzani was never charged. Was it a false confession? A pathological liar seeking attention? Or did he know something the police couldn't prove? This third man theory would explain. The unknown letter in the note. The missing money. Why didn't they arrive alone? Perhaps even the capsules. But it has enormous problems. Why would thieves leave money and valuables behind? Why are there no signs of a struggle or violence? Why did Manuel and Miguel put on the masks voluntarily? What about UFO sightings? Theory 4, Ray. This is the most conventional explanation that has been proposed. It was a rainy night. There was lightning. Manuel and Miguel were on top of a hill with metal objects on their faces. Is it possible they were struck by lightning? Some residents of the area said that the lights that others saw were not a UFO, but simply distant lightning. A lightning bolt would explain the sudden death of both. Possibly residual radiation. Possibly the scorched soil. But this theory has serious problems. First, lightning victims show characteristic burns. Lichtenberg patterns on the skin. Singed clothing. None of this was reported on the bodies. Second, a lightning bolt does not explain the pre-prepared masks, the note with instructions, the ritual protocol. Third, it does not explain the abnormal decomposition of internal organs. Fourth, it does not explain the previous case of 1962 with Hermes Luis Feitosa in almost identical circumstances. And fifth, it doesn't explain why they bought raincoats, mineral water, built a shelter, all indicating that they planned to be there for hours. The lightning theory is, honestly, the weakest. It tries to force a conventional explanation into a case that simply doesn't fit conventional explanations. So, after examining all the theories, after reviewing decades of research, after analyzing every piece of evidence, what do we really know? We know that two intelligent men, with families, with plans for the future, climbed a hill in August 1966. We know that they wore lead masks made specifically for that moment. We know that they followed a written protocol with precise schedules. We know that multiple witnesses saw something unusual in the sky that night. And we know that both died in circumstances that, almost 60 years later, no one has been able to satisfactorily explain. But there are 7 big questions that remain unanswered. 1. What did the capsules mentioned in the note contain? They were never found. They were never analyzed. 2. Who wrote the note? It wasn't Manuel's or Miguel's handwriting. 3. Who was the third man the guard reported? Did he actually exist? 4. What was the orange object that Gracinda and her children saw on the hill? Was it real or an interpretation of some natural phenomenon? 5. What caused the abnormal decomposition of the bodies? Why were the organs liquefied? 6. Why did the soil where they lay remain sterile 14 years later? Was there really residual radiation? And 7. The most fundamental question of all. What sign were they waiting for? And, did they receive it? The case of the lead masks was never truly closed. It was archived, which is different. For Manuel and Miguel's families, there was never any closure. They never knew for sure what led their husbands and fathers to that hill. They never understood what happened in those final hours. For the researchers, the case became something more, a reminder that there are events that challenge our ordered categories of explanation. Jacques Vallée opened his book, Confrontations, with this case specifically because, in his words, it represents something fundamental about the nature of anomalous phenomena. They are not always clear. They are not always explainable. And sometimes, the line between human intention and external phenomenon becomes blurred. Today, almost 60 years later, Morro do Vintém remains a place that some consider special. Some say it has an unusual energy. Others avoid the specific site where the bodies were found. The files on UFOs in Brazil remain the most consulted in the country's national archives. And the case of the lead masks remains, according to Vallé's classification system, one of the best documented and least explained encounters in modern history. Perhaps the most disturbing aspect of the case is what it reveals about human nature. Manuel and Miguel were not ignorant or naive people. They were skilled technicians. They understood circuits, electricity, and modern technology. But they also understood that there are questions that technology doesn't answer. Questions about consciousness, about reality, about what else exists out there. And they were willing to risk everything to find answers. That, regardless of what actually happened, is profoundly human. So what really happened in Morro do Vintém on the night of August 17, 1966? Was it a spiritualist experiment gone tragically wrong? Two men who accidentally poisoned themselves while pursuing mystical experiences? Or was it something more? Did something answer their call? Did they see something we weren't prepared to see? The honest truth is, we don't know. And perhaps we'll never know. The lead masks remain in some evidence archive in Brazil. Real physical objects of a mystery we haven't been able to solve. The note, with its enigmatic protocol, remains as cryptic as ever. And that piece of land in Morro do Vintém is still there. Waiting, perhaps, for someone with modern technology to finally answer the questions that science in 1966 couldn't. This case reminds us of something important. Not everything has an easy explanation. Not everything fits neatly into our categories of real or imagined, natural or supernatural. Sometimes, reality is simply stranger than our models can accommodate. And sometimes, questions are more valuable than falsely certain answers. What do you think happened? A spiritualist experiment? Extraterrestrial contact? Something we haven't considered yet? Leave your theory in the comments. Let's talk about this. And if this case fascinated you as much as it did me, there are dozens of equally intriguing cases that we'll explore on this channel. Cases with solid evidence, serious investigation, and questions that remain unanswered. Subscribe so you don't miss any. Like this video if you enjoyed this format. And share it with someone who appreciates a good mystery. Morro do Vintém is still there. The masks are still in that archive. And somewhere, perhaps, lies the answer Manuel and Miguel were searching for. Maybe we'll find her someday. Until next time, keep questioning.